G'day everyone, welcome to my first bench video. Welcome everyone to my first video on the bench. I hope I've been able to convey everything that I want in this video in terms of information. Please do give me feedback on the comments, I'm always keen to hear about it. So in this video, we're just going to be doing the dismantling of the small gents watch. It's a small 10.5 line. It could almost pass as a ladies watch. And I'm really just going to talk through all the steps that I go through in terms of servicing a watch. Heavily condensed and reduced, so anyways, bear with me. So in this first step here, the first thing really is to get an overview of the watch. I check the hands, I check the timer setting, the cannon pinion friction and all that. The close-up you saw there of the balance wheel was just really me already having a look at a couple of things that I'm going to have to adjust as I go through. So I've taken out the stem, I've taken out the casing screws, and just sort of setting up the rest of the bench, which is something I probably should have done a little bit earlier. It's amazing production there, very high quality and high budget. So we're back at it. Really, I like to have my basket laid out, and as I'm pulling the watch apart, I'm putting everything into the basket organized in a manner that it's pretty much consistent with all my repairs. And as I'm doing that, I'm just putting everything in as it goes. That way I don't lose bits and pieces, and I kind of know where I'm up to. So once the movement is out of the case, the next step is to remove the hands. So I pop the stem back in to make sure I can align the hands. And I've set a dial protector and some hand removers there. They're the red Horotech ones that you see there. So I set my dial protector. This is just a Horotech one. You can pretty much use anything. You can cut a bit of plastic out, anything, as long as you're very mindful of what is touching the dial and making sure that it's not going to damage it. So with these particular levers, you just want to go all the way in, put as little pressure as possible, especially with something like this, like a ceramic dial, and those hands generally tend to come off. If there's any resistance there, make sure you just allow the levers to do the work. Don't try and force against the dial, just very gently allow the pressure to sort of the levers to do the work themselves. So hands are off, and now the dial comes off, and in this particular one, it's got two screws on the back of the movement as opposed to on the side, and these are the ones that have a slight cutout which sort of cut into the dial feet. So I'm just finding the right location there of the screws, and once they're clear I can take off the dial. Great, so the dial's off. The dial will be put aside for the moment, as will the case. I won't be looking at that in this particular video. Okay, so the checking continues. So as I said in the intro, this is all dismantling and checking. So every single bit that I take off this watch, I'm checking. I just took off the hour wheel, I checked all the teeth, make sure none of them are bent. I'm now looking at the interaction between the cannon pinion, the minute wheel, the setting lever, the yoke, the whole winding and setting mechanism, intermediate wheels. I've just taken off the minute wheel, which I'm inspecting there, and I'm going to put into the basket. That's ready for cleaning. Now comes the cannon pinion. There's many different schools of thoughts and ways that people take off cannon pinions. With this particular one, it was small enough that I could hold the tweezers on the notch and more or less lever it off. Had it proven to be more difficult, I might have adopted a different method, but this allowed me to do it without any issues. Again, looking at the leaves of the cannon pinion to make sure none are bent or damaged to the point where I have to address them somehow. And now I grab a movement holder. Okay, this is one of the most important checks that you can do on a watch, and this is checking the end shake. This is the end shake of the balance, so this is the up and down movement. You want to make sure that there is end shake. There's not too little and not too much, and that's a very arbitrary term or arbitrary phrase to use, because you might think what's too little and what's too much. Unfortunately for now, I'm just going to stick to saying it's experience, but there's definitely plenty of resources out there where you can look that up, and I'm happy to do videos on that in future in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. But for the purposes of this video, I'll just carry on. And now taking off the screw for the balance cock and making sure I'm taking out that balance wheel very carefully by tilting up the movement, and I want to keep that balance wheel and hairspring safe by putting it on its back. So again, checking everything that I'm looking at here. First thing I do is just check the bottom pivot of the balance wheel, check the hairspring, the general condition of what's going on. And now I'll remove the balance wheel from the balance cock. So I've undone the stud screw there. And now I have a close-up look at both the upper and lower pivot to make sure that there's no scoring, that it's not bent, that it's not worn, that there's nothing funny going on there, nothing which I need to address. I also look at screws in the balance, basically everything to make sure that I'm trying to capture any issues now rather than later in terms of what needs to be repaired. So now I go ahead and remove. In this particular watch, it hasn't got shock protection, so I remove the upper cap jewel, if you like, which is in a little setting, so that holds in the regulator there. And in this video I'm pointing out just how dirty it is on the cap. You can see on the reflection there's a bit of a smear. Just a good little tip or trick if you're someone that works on watches or just getting into it. Just run it over some paper. It cleans it up very quickly, and the purpose of that really is to just get that oil off. Depending on what cleaning machine you have, the machines normally do a pretty good job, but force of habit, I've done a lot of hand cleaning. Prior to having the machine that I have now, everything was done completely by hand to give the watch the best chance to come out as clean as possible when it's in the machine. So I've just checked the pallets to make sure that the locking and unlocking action is fine, that the depthing is fine, that things are generally looking okay. The end shake of the pallet as well, I've checked. So now this comes off, and then I proceed to removing the pallet cock and the pallets to make sure that the pallet is in good order. Here I'm checking the jewels, the upper jewel of the pallet to make sure that it's not damaged in any way. And here we have a close-up look at the face of the pallets. Now these ones are a little bit marked. If you have a look, there's a bit of scoring and marking on it. And even though these are jewels and it's steel hitting up against it, over the years, now this watch is probably 100 years old or so, over the years marking does occur. And look, full disclosure, for this particular watch, for this particular client, I know their expectations, I know what they want to spend and what they don't want to spend, so I won't be replacing them. Now some of you might scream, oh, that's sacrilege, you have to do it. Look, part of it really is working to the customer's expectations and budget, and changing the pallets, first of all, finding the right jewels, taking them out, putting them in, adjusting them to make sure the depthings are right is a whole other thing that would add a significant cost to the repair. It can 100% be done. I have all the tools and the parts for it, but for this particular purpose, that won't be done. Now here I'm checking the end shake of the barrel. It's the barrel complete in its arbor. It's very important. I'm noticing there's a bit of wear in the upper bearing. It's not a lot. It's not a lot for me to actually bush it, but I'm showing you there the up and down movement of the barrel. The more it wears, the more there's this movement, and that, if it becomes too excessive, it causes meshing problems, it causes issues with wearing teeth and pinion leaves funnily. But the most important thing is it takes away from the overall amplitude and power of the watch, and that's what you don't want at the end of the day. That's what affects performance overall. So here I'm checking the barrel to make sure the lower arbor bearing is okay, and it's not too bad. Look, I've seen really bad ones, and if you have a look through my Instagram, you'll see that there's definitely a few that are very worn. So in this particular case, I'm going to leave it as is. I don't see a reason to bush it or do anything extreme to it. So carry on taking off the crown wheel there. Again, inspecting the teeth under it, inspecting the washer under it, and making sure that it's all as clean as possible before it goes in the machine. So now I'm checking the wear of the upper and lower center wheel. So that's a lower center wheel. That again has a little bit of movement, side to side movement that pivot has. Look, again, it's not extreme, and I have to make a judgment call based on the interaction of that wheel and its meshing with other pinions and its general position. If it's going to rub on something or touch on something sometime soon, I'll address it. If not, then there's no reason to do extreme repairs on something for no reason at all. But these are the things that you have to check during every service, during every watch, no matter the watch, no matter how old it is or how new it is. This is something I routinely check because you just don't know when it's going to be an issue. And as you can see, half the watch is apart already. If you find that this is an issue right at the end, you don't want to be pulling the entire watch apart to sort that out. So I'm taking off the click and the click spring. The click is the thing that goes click when you wind the watch. I'm using a plastic pokey tool there to ensure that the spring doesn't fly away. They have a tendency to literally just disappear when you lever it in the wrong direction, so it's always a good idea to cover it with something to make sure it doesn't vanish on you. So now I'm very carefully prying this barrel bridge, or it's barrel center wheel bridge, taking it off, and again inspecting all the jewel holes and really just having a good look around at everything. So now I'm looking at the stem, the winding pinion, the clutch, checking the teeth. Sometimes the teeth can become extremely burred, so I'm looking to make sure the jewels aren't cracked, and these are the teeth that I was telling you about. Sometimes they become very burred and you have to try and replace it if possible or address it. But thankfully, even though this is a manual watch and it's been winding for years, many years, they're still in relatively good condition, which is very good. Slightly dirty jewel there. A very good method of cleaning is using pegwood, which is I believe from the orange tree, which you sharpen and shape as much as you like. But the good thing about pegwood is that you can sharpen it to a point, and I normally dip it in isopropyl alcohol. Some people use benzene, which is a hydrocarbon. I prefer alcohol. It's a little bit more environmentally friendly and friendly to yourself as well. The benefit of pegwood is that as you poke it in, it takes shape of whatever you're cleaning. As you can see the little fine tip on that. Now I'm going to do it in a larger bearing, and you'll see that it'll immediately take shape of that as well, and that cleans the inside of it. Now, as I mentioned before, I used to do this with every single jewel hole. I've been doing some experimentation with my new cleaning machine, and with the ultrasonic capabilities, I've found that there's really there's no difference if you actually peg them out or not, if you clean out the jewel holes beforehand. So it saved me a lot of time in terms of doing that, in terms of being able to just basically address a watch, pull it apart, repair it, and let the machine do the work. Of course, if it's heavily dirty, I'll clean it by hand, like I showed you with those jewels, but not always necessary. And I carry on inspecting all the jewels and the bridges there. That was the escape wheel bridge, and now I think it's the fourth wheel bridge or cock, probably cock. And the reason I've been told is that a cock will have one screw and a bridge will have more than one. Sounds like bad jokes, but no, it's true. Here's a very important check, which is checking the teeth of every wheel in a watch, checking the pinion leaves to make sure they're all fine, and also checking the pivots, which I'll show in a moment. You want to do this with every single wheel in a watch. As you're pulling it apart, you're checking every single little thing to make sure there's nothing there that's going to set a trap for you as you're working on it. This one seems to be fine, and the rest of the watch was also quite fine. You'll find some examples throughout my Instagram where they weren't very fine, and I've had to actually polish them on my pivot polishing machine or on a lathe. So feel free to have a look at that for a good example. You know, I have heard arguments where people think this might be too excessive, but on an old watch like this, you have to do it. There's nothing worse than putting a watch together, putting it on test and finding out that it stops for some reason, and you end up scratching your head and wasting so much time over it, not knowing why it's stopping or doing what it's doing. And this method really avoids that happening. It's been tried and tested. My first teacher, which I mentioned in my other video, my first video, Carl Braunsteiner from Master Watchmaking, really spent a lot of time drilling this method into me. So here I've found a good issue to point out. The barrel arbor has got a bit of movement in the barrel. That's a bit too much for my liking, and although I could say, yeah, sure, I could leave it and it would be fine, and you know what, the watch will wind and would be fine, but the next question is, will it last until the next service? And the answer is probably not. And that's one other thing I'm trying to address. I don't want to shortchange the customer. And this is just another overview of the main plate. Just having an overall look to make sure I haven't missed anything, overall general condition. And coming back to the winding and setting, I did identify an issue earlier on, which I'm coming back to, which I didn't point out before. One thing I noticed when I set the time was, as I put it into time setting mode, when I pulled out the stem, it had a bit of a tendency to fall back in and go back into winding position. Now I found that a little bit strange, so as I was pulling it apart, I sort of kept that in mind, and I thought there's something up with the winding, I need to check it out. So you saw I pulled most of it apart before. Now I've gone and pulled some of it back on, the winding and setting in particular, to inspect it. And I do find something weird here. First of all, that screw there is just yucky, needs to be changed. Not the end of the world, but I don't like it like that. And I also noticed there that the yoke and the setting lever have a very weird interaction. The yoke, which I'll show in a moment, isn't very well shaped. So when the setting lever sits on it, it doesn't rest properly and it tends to kind of slip back. Now, if you have a look here, see all that rough stuff just sort of in the middle there? That shouldn't be there. For the amount of friction that this part has, this particular section should be very smooth, should be refined, and that's what I'm going to try and do now. So, like I said, all the repairs are done while the watch is being pulled apart. So I'm putting it in this hand vise. Very handy tool, that thing, and pulling out the big guns here. So I've got a very fine file, which I start with just to shape it properly, just to get a bit of shape into it. So spend a bit of time getting that right. Then I move on to a ceramic file, which is a little bit finer. It won't be as coarse, and I'll get a smoother finish than with the previous file. And I don't know if I showed it in this particular part, but I do move to an even finer file to get a better finish towards the end. So now we can see that small section there is a little bit smoother. So if you want to go back to the previous video and compare it, you'll find that it's a lot different. And I've also shaped the section where the setting lever sits in a different manner to ensure that it will actually sit into it. And now I put it back on to test that. I didn't completely rebuild the setting mechanism, which is probably would have been a better idea, but I put it in just enough to be able to test it and get an idea of what was going on. Now that screw that I said has to be replaced, I found something that sort of fit. It was a bit large though, so I had to put the screw in the lathe and reduce the diameter of the head, or else it wouldn't have fit into the little section properly, and that wouldn't have been a good thing. So here I'm just using a graver to reduce the diameter of the head of the screw. And that's a screw in place, which is different to the previous one. And that sort of action that you saw, the setting lever rubbing up against that yoke, we want a very smooth action. And like I said, I should have put the spring back in and checked it, but it's something I did eventually later on, and it seemed to be working quite fine. So now we go back to the barrel and arbor, which I pointed out was had a bit too much wear on it. And I'm just popping the lid off the barrel now. Generally I don't do this at eye level. I couldn't find a better way to record it there, so I had to do it there. The barrel is a little bit marked. It's not too bad, but considering we're going to be adjusting the bearings on it, I'm going to polish it up with some fine ceramic fiber, just to give it a better finish. Seeing as I'm already going to be going through all that trouble, it just takes 10 minutes or so to set this up and give it a little bit of a polish. And again, I might be gaining, I don't know, look, just a guess, 5 degrees of amplitude more by doing this, by polishing it up, another 10 by adjusting the barrel. But overall that contributes, especially on something old. And as you saw, when I took out the mainspring, it was very small and coiled up. That's going to have to be replaced, because that's, again, it would run, but it really wouldn't run very well. There are some cases where I do leave the original mainspring in and I can get away with it, but in this case I don't see that happening. So I believe I've just turned the barrel arbor around. So obviously it's got 4 bearing surfaces on it. It's got for the upper and lower, the barrel drum, barrel lid, and then also the upper barrel bridge and the lower main plate. So it's got 4 bearing surfaces that this arbor makes contact with, and those 4 sections, if there's too much friction there, will lead to increased issues. Well, not issues with the watch, but it'll cause more detriment to the watch than anything. So now we see a more barrel arbor, which is in better condition than it previously was. Sorry, I mentioned something about the mainspring before. I haven't even pulled it out yet. I just took the arbor out. Like I said, not something I do at eye level normally, because these things can shoot out sometimes. But look, this thing is all coiled up and tiny. I'll have to get you another shot of a newer mainspring, but they're generally not that coiled up. They should have a fair bit more life in it. That just happens with metal fatigue and stuff over time. All right, my favorite tool, the staking set. I've got about 5 of these babies. I've got to do a video on it. I've had a request, I think, from Joe and Tim. Haven't forgotten about you guys. Anyways, this tool is a very important tool. So here I'm just making sure I've got the right punch set up, and all I'm going to do is tap it to basically close that hole, to basically reduce the diameter of that hole, because over time it's become worn and stretched out. So I've just done the drum, and now I'm setting up to do the lid. setting that up, making sure it's all good. There's a lot of setting up and things here, and I'm doing a lot in between, so you'll see a couple of cuts to random shots. Right, so I just put the barrel arbor sort of near the hole to make sure that I've tightened it enough. If the barrel arbor fits in, then it's still too loose, so I have to tighten it again, and that's sort of what I check. So once I'm happy that's tight enough, I personally use a smoothing broach to basically increase that diameter gradually up to a point where the barrel arbor fits in again. Some people use a cutting reamer. I prefer a smoothing broach because it work hardens the material as you're coming up to diameter. So I just tried the barrel arbor there. I've probably found that it didn't fit in, so I'm going to just keep doing this until I find that the arbor goes in. There's two things that I do. I smooth it up, so make the diameter bigger, and then I also use a chamfering tool, if you like, or a countersink tool to take off the burr that I'm creating as I'm using the smoothing broach. That's the one there. Some people call it a pizza cutter tool, countersink tool, deburring tool, something along those lines. And I just give it one last touch because I know that tool always creates an extra burr, and we're pretty much good to go. So what you want to see is it falls in gently and then it falls out just as easy. That way you know that it's going to be set up properly. I do the same thing with the lid, tighten it, smooth it up, countersink it, etc. And now we put the barrel complete back together, ensuring that I've got that notch pointing the right way. So I just seal it up. So now I want to check to make sure that that's running smoothly. And you'll see that movement we had before, gone. Look how nice it is. We've got a little bit of play there, which is excellent because you want a little bit of play so it's not tightening up. Same with that lower one. And now if I put it between the tweezers and check it, it's running free. See that? That's running very nicely. Now I know that the motive force, the driving power of the watch is in its best possible condition. That's going to give me the best chance to make sure this watch runs as good as possible. And yeah, I carry on and basically put everything in the watch basket, and yeah, get ready to put it in the cleaning machine. So make sure everything's off, make sure everything is taken apart. I take out all the screws. I don't like to leave any screws in, including dial screws of any sort, because you find some moisture can get in there, and if it doesn't dry out, they end up rusting in or getting stuck or whatnot. So now I'm happy to put this in the cleaning machine. I did do a whole bunch of other repairs off screen. I was just running out of time, and it was going to take forever. Recording this actually was a lot more difficult than I expected. I had 3 cameras set up, one on top, one in front, and I had one with a good close-up lens attached to it. So this was really the process of just dismantling a time-only watch. Please give me feedback if you have any questions, anything you'd like to see. If you want to see the next section, if you want to see me putting something together, oiling it, etc., please let me know. But otherwise, look, I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you've stuck through the whole video, I really do appreciate it. I'm really doing these videos to share my knowledge, to share my love for horology, and hopefully some people might learn something or be inspired, and also hopefully get a bit of appreciation for what some watchmen, and not all people go to this level of repairing, but what some of us are trying to do in terms of achieving the best repair for your watch. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.